My name is Hilda. I'm 60 years old, and 3 days ago, my life ended. Or at least, it should have. Because 3 days ago, my own son Damien and his wife Melissa pushed my husband Henry and me off a 90-foot cliff. I can still hear the sound of the rocks breaking beneath my body, still feel the sickening drop in my stomach as the ground vanished under my feet. I can still taste the blood filling my mouth when I hit the earth below. And in those endless seconds of falling, I knew the people I loved most had decided I didn't deserve to live. When I woke up at the bottom of that gorge, everything was broken, my ribs, my arm, my trust in humanity. But before I could even move, Henry, my husband of 40 years, leaned close to me. His voice was broken, trembling with pain, but sharp as a command. "Hilda, don't move, play dead." That was the moment everything changed. I never thought my life would come to this. For 4 decades, Henry and I built what I thought was the perfect American dream. We had a little home in the suburbs, a white porch with rocking chairs, a kitchen that always smelled like coffee in the morning. I was an elementary school teacher. Every afternoon, I'd come home with stories about the kids I taught. Henry ran his own carpentry shop. His hands were strong and rough, but they could take a plain block of wood and turn it into something beautiful. We raised 2 sons in that house. Richard, our firstborn, the light of our lives, always laughing, always helping, always protecting me from any worry. And Damien, 5 years younger, quieter, more withdrawn, but I loved him just the same. A mother always tells herself she doesn't play favorites. At least, I thought I didn't. On Sundays, after church, we gathered around the big oak table Henry had carved himself. Richard would talk about wanting to study engineering, while Damien picked at his food in silence. Life was simple, filled with family dinners, backyard barbecues, and late-night walks through our little town. Back then, I thought those walks were preparing us for a peaceful old age together. I never imagined they were training for the one walk that nearly killed us, 3 days ago. Damien called us with a surprise. He said he wanted to celebrate our anniversary by taking us on a family hike in the mountains. A perfect day together, he promised. But that perfect day ended with us lying, broken at the bottom of a cliff. I remember the fall in slow motion, the sound of Melissa's camera clicking. As she pretended to take a family picture, the sudden shove from behind, the shock of empty air beneath my heels. I remember Henry's hand clawing at mine as the world spun around us, the sharp whistle of the wind in my ears, and then impact. The pain was indescribable. My chest caved in with every breath. My shoulders screamed in agony. I could hear Melissa's laughter echoing in my head, even though she wasn't laughing at all. Maybe it was just my mind, twisting everything I thought I knew about her kindness into something cruel. For a moment, I thought it was over, that my story ended there, among the rocks and the dirt. But then Henry whispered, "Play dead." So I lay there, still as stone, even though my body begged me to scream. I forced my breath shallow, made my eyes stare blank and empty. Just a broken old woman at the bottom of a gorge. A few feet away, I could hear Damien groaning. He and Melissa had fallen too, dragged down by the same force that pulled us. But unlike us, their voices weren't full of fear. They were calculating. "They're dead," Damien croaked after a long pause. "Both of them. Eyes open, no breathing. And Melissa, my sweet, smiling daughter-in-law, the one who had hugged me like a mother, who had called me Mom." Her voice turned sharp as a knife. "Perfect," she whispered. "It worked just like we planned." In that moment, I felt a new kind of pain. Not just in my broken bones, but in my heart. Because I realized this wasn't an accident. This wasn't desperation. This was something they had planned for months. I was nothing more than an obstacle to them. Nothing more than a pile of money they could inherit once I was gone. Lying there, pretending to be dead, I replayed every memory of the past few months. The lawyer's office, the will, Damien's sudden interest in our finances, Melissa's sweet insistence that she only wanted what was best for us. Now I understood. Every smile had been a lie. Every hug, every kind word, a carefully crafted performance to hide the truth. My son and his wife wanted me gone. And as I lay there in the dirt, blood soaking my blouse, I couldn't stop asking myself one question. When did my own child stop loving me? The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the gorge. Melissa was still talking, her voice distant but sharp. At least we don't have to pretend anymore. Now we can move on. I closed my eyes tighter, letting the words cut into me like glass. Pretend. That's all I had been to her. To them, Henry's hand squeezed mine, so faint I almost missed it. His voice rasped through cracked lips. "Stay still, Hilda. Don't give them a reason to finish the job." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to ask God why this was happening. But instead, I listened to my husband, the man who had never let me down, not once in 40 years. So I stayed still. And that was how our nightmare began. If you want to understand how Henry and I ended up broken at the bottom of that gorge, you first need to know the family we thought we had. Because once upon a time, we were happy. At least I believed we were. I used to wake up every morning to the smell of fresh coffee drifting through our little suburban home. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was ours. A white 2-story with green shutters and a porch Henry built himself. He even carved our initials into the railings, like 2 kids in love who never grew up. Henry's mornings always started in the workshop behind our house. He was a carpenter by trade, and people in town swore his hands were blessed. He could take a crooked piece of wood and turn it into a rocking chair that would last for generations. As for me, I was a teacher at the local elementary school. I'd come home every afternoon with crayons still on my hands and a dozen stories from my students. I loved children, and teaching gave me purpose. I never knew that the real heartbreak of my life would come from my own children. We had 2 boys. Richard, our firstborn, was 5 years older than his brother Damien. From the moment he could walk, Richard filled the house with laughter. He was the kind of boy who held the door open for strangers, who stayed late to help his father in the shop, who brought me flowers from the neighbor's garden and swore they were just lying on the ground. He was joy itself. Damien, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved. He liked to keep to himself, drawing in notebooks or wandering alone through the yard. He was different, but I loved him no less. I told myself I treated them equally, though maybe deep down I knew I leaned on Richard more. He was the shield of our family, the boy who carried light wherever he went. Our Sundays were sacred. After church, the whole family gathered around the oak table Henry carved by hand. I can still picture it now, its surface smooth as glass, every knot in the wood polished with love. Richard would tell us about his dreams of becoming an engineer, while Damien sat quiet, pushing peas around his plate. The house was alive on those afternoons. My sisters Harriet and Irene would come with their children, and soon the walls shook with laughter. Kids ran barefoot through the hallways, women traded recipes in the kitchen, and the men fixed something in the yard just for the excuse of working with Henry's tools. At night, after everyone left, Henry and I would sit on the porch in those rocking chairs he built. We'd look up at the stars and talk about the future, about seeing the ocean someday, about growing old together in that house, about watching our grandchildren play in the same yard where our sons had once run wild. I thought those dreams would carry us peacefully into old age. I thought we were unshakable. But even in those golden years, I can see now that cracks were forming. When Richard turned 20, something shifted. Suddenly, the house wasn't full of laughter anymore. The boys whispered in the hallways, their arguments cutting off the second I entered the room. I'd catch Richard looking frustrated, Damien looking resentful. Henry told me it was normal, just brothers fighting. But a mother always knows when something is wrong. I should have asked more questions. I should have dug deeper. But I didn't, because back then, I still believed in the picture-perfect family we had built. One autumn evening, I remember watching Richard at the dinner table. His eyes were bright as he talked about applying to engineering school. He wanted to build bridges, he said. Bridges that would last longer than he would. Damien didn't say a word. He just stared at his plate, jaw clenched, as if every word out of Richard's mouth was a personal insult. After dinner, Richard helped his father clean the workshop. I watched from the porch as Henry handed him tools, proud of the young man he was becoming. Damien stood in the shadows, watching too. His face was unreadable. I told myself I was imagining it, but I swear there was something cold in his eyes that night. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself families go through rough patches, that brothers fight and make up, that everything was fine, but I was wrong. So very wrong, because just a few weeks later, something happened that shattered our perfect life forever. It was a chilly October night, the kind where the wind howls through the trees and makes you want to stay close to the fire. Richard promised he'd be home for dinner. I made his favorite stew, let it simmer for hours, the smell filling every corner of the house. But he never came home. We waited until 9. Then 10. Then midnight. Damien sat in his room with the door closed, claiming he was studying. My heart grew heavier with every passing hour. By dawn, the police were at our door, and when the sun rose that morning, our lives were never the same. It was October. The air had that sharp chill that tells you winter is coming. I remember setting the table that night, humming softly as the smell of beef stew filled the house. Richard had promised he'd be home for dinner, and I wanted everything to be perfect. But Richard never came home. At first, I wasn't worried. He was 20 by then, a college student, busy with friends and classes. Maybe he stopped to study at the library. Maybe he grabbed food on the way. By 9 o'clock, I called his phone. No answer. By 10, I left 3 voicemails. Still nothing. By midnight, my chest felt so heavy I could barely breathe. I remember standing at the window, pressing my hand against the cold glass, praying to see headlights pulling into our driveway. But the street stayed dark, silent, empty. Damien was upstairs, door locked, saying he had a lot of homework. Henry tried to calm me down, rubbing my shoulders, telling me boys will be boys. "He's probably fine, Hilda," he whispered. But even he couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. By dawn, a knock came at the door. It was the police. They told us Richard's car had been found off the road near the riverbank. The vehicle was upside down, half submerged in water. Richard was inside, gone. I can still hear the officer's voice in my head, flat, professional, but almost apologetic. It looks like he lost control. Probably swerved, maybe fell asleep at the wheel. We're treating it as an accident. An accident. That word tore me apart. Henry pulled me into his arms as I sobbed against his chest, my whole body shaking. My beautiful boy, my sunshine, my Richard, gone in an instant. The house was never the same after that. I walked past his empty bedroom and felt my knees buckle. I still set the table for 4 by mistake. Every little thing reminded me of him. The shoes by the door, the books stacked on his desk, the jacket he left on the chair as if he was planning to grab it on his way out. Grief doesn't just break you. It haunts you, but in the middle of that grief, something else began to gnaw at me. Something colder. Damien, my younger son, barely shed a tear. At the funeral, while I could hardly stand, Damien's face was blank. He hugged me, yes, but his arms hung limp. His eyes were dry. And later that night, when the mourners had gone and the candles burned low, I walked past his room and heard laughter. Damien's laughter. He was on the phone with someone, speaking in hushed tones, chuckling at jokes, as though nothing in our world had changed. I told myself it was just his way of coping. Everyone grieves differently, right? That's what people always say. But deep in my gut, I knew something was wrong. A mother always knows. One evening, about a week after Richard's death, I found Henry sitting alone in the workshop. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he held a folder. "What's that?" I asked. Henry looked at me with eyes that had aged 10 years in a week. "I shouldn't tell you," he whispered. Not yet, but I pressed him. I begged him. And finally, he slid the folder toward me. Inside were copies of Richard's notes, handwritten pages, bank statements, receipts. Richard had been investigating something before he died. According to his notes, money had been disappearing from Henry's business account. Not in huge amounts at first, just small withdrawals. But over time, thousands of dollars were gone, and all of it pointed to one person. Damien. I felt the world tilt beneath me. My baby, my quiet, brooding, reserved child. Could he really have stolen from his own father? Could he have betrayed us like this? Henry's jaw clenched as he whispered, "Richard found out." He was going to confront him. And then the accident happened. My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, to deny it, to tear up those papers and say Henry was wrong. But the evidence was right there in front of me. My Richard hadn't just died. He'd been silenced. And Damien. He was the only one who had something to gain. I tried to talk to Damien that night. I asked him how he was holding up, if he missed his brother, if there was anything he wanted to confess. His face hardened. He didn't even look at me. "Stop asking me questions," he muttered. "You always loved him more." The words sliced through me. I wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that I loved both my sons with every fiber of my being. But his eyes were cold. It was the first time I looked at my child and felt fear. For weeks, I lived in a haze of grief and suspicion. Every creak in the house, every shadow in the hallway felt sinister. Damien spent more time away from home, and when he was there, he locked himself in his room. Henry kept the folder hidden, as though protecting me. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. If Richard had discovered Damien was stealing, and then Richard ended up dead in an accident, what did that mean? Could my son really have been responsible for his brother's death? One night, I woke up to find Henry sitting on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark. His voice was low, heavy with certainty. "Hilda," he said, "that wasn't an accident. Richard didn't just die. He was killed." I froze. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. And then Henry added words that still haunt me. "And I think Damien knows exactly what happened." After Richard's death, life in our home felt hollow. The laughter that once filled those walls was gone, replaced by silence and suspicion. Henry and I tiptoed around our own house like strangers, while Damien moved about like he owned the place. It was as if Richard's absence had carved out a hole that Damien was eager to fill, not with love, but with power. It began with little comments. "When you're gone, what happens to the house?" he asked one evening, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Or, "Dad, don't you think it's time you updated the business paperwork? You're not getting any younger." At first, I brushed it off as nerves, maybe even grief. But grief doesn't sharpen your eyes like a knife. Grief doesn't make you greedy. One evening, Damien brought Melissa over for dinner. She was his new girlfriend then, a pretty young woman with a dazzling smile and a voice like honey. I wanted to believe she was good for him. I wanted to believe maybe she'd soften his rough edges. But Melissa was sharper than Damien in every way. She asked questions about our savings, about our house, about Henry's carpentry business. Not in an obvious way, but in a way that made me feel stripped bare. "Wow, this house must be worth a fortune now," she said sweetly, running her fingers over the oak table. "Such a perfect family heirloom." Her eyes flicked toward Damien, and he smirked. A month later, Damien came to us with a request. "Mom, Dad, it's time you updated your will," he said flatly. "It only makes sense that Melissa and I inherit everything. You wouldn't want complications if something happened, right?" The words stole the air from my lungs. I stared at him, speechless. My son, my flesh and blood, asking about our death as if it were just another business transaction. Henry's face darkened, his jaw tight. "That's not your concern," he growled. But Damien didn't back down. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "You don't have Richard anymore. I'm all you've got left. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I felt sick. I wanted to scream, to throw him out of my home. But Henry put a hand on mine under the table, steadying me. That night, after Damien left, Henry showed me something he had been hiding. It was a small voice recorder. He'd been secretly recording conversations, collecting proof that Damien wasn't just greedy. He was dangerous. "Hilda," Henry whispered, "Richard didn't just die. He found something. Damien was stealing from the business, thousands of dollars, and Melissa's helping him." My stomach twisted. I remembered Melissa's syrupy voice, the way she clung to Damien, the way her eyes always seemed to flicker toward the things we owned instead of the people we were. "Richard was going to expose him," Henry continued, his voice breaking. "That's why Damien needed him gone." The room spun. My hands shook. My baby, my youngest son, wasn't just a thief. He was a killer. After that night, Henry and I started locking our bedroom door. We whispered our fears late at night, terrified Damien might overhear. But the more we tried to protect ourselves, the bolder he became. He showed up unannounced. He demanded we sign documents giving him power of attorney just in case. He pressured Henry to hand over the deed to the workshop, and every time we said no, his smile grew thinner, his eyes colder. Melissa played her part perfectly. She was sugar and light in front of us, but I caught the way she squeezed Damien's hand under the table, the way she whispered to him when they thought we weren't looking. It was a performance. And we were the audience. One night, after a particularly tense dinner, Henry pulled me aside. His face was pale, his voice low. "They won't wait forever, Hilda," he said. "They want us out of the way. And if we don't do something soon—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I saw the fear in his eyes. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Because just when I thought Damien's greed had hit its peak, he and Melissa made an announcement. "We're planning a trip," Melissa said brightly. "A family hike in the mountains. Just the four of us, fresh air, beautiful views. A perfect way to celebrate your anniversary." Her smile was so wide, so cheerful, it almost blinded me. But Henry squeezed my hand under the table, and in that squeeze, I felt his warning. This wasn't a trip. It was a trap. That night, as we lay in bed, Henry turned to me, his voice heavy with dread. "They're going to kill us, Hilda." I stared at him, my blood running cold. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, refusing to believe. But Henry's eyes, those steady, loving eyes that had never lied to me in 40 years, told me the truth, and deep down, I knew he was right. The invitation sounded innocent enough. A family hike, fresh air, mountain views, a picnic to celebrate our anniversary. But Henry and I knew better. This wasn't a gift, it was a goodbye. Melissa chirped about the plan as though she were talking about a vacation brochure. "We'll pack lunch, bring the camera, take some beautiful family photos," she said with a grin that made my stomach turn. Damien just stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes cold. He didn't bother pretending anymore. Henry and I exchanged a glance, silent but clear. We both knew, if we said no, it would only make them angrier. Refusing might even speed things up, so we agreed. And in that moment, I felt the clock ticking down on our lives. The morning of the trip, I tried to stay strong. I made coffee, dressed, in my hiking clothes, and forced a smile into the mirror. "We'll be fine," I whispered to my reflection, though I didn't believe it. Henry checked the car twice, making sure the brakes worked. He tucked a small recorder in his jacket pocket, one last attempt to leave behind proof if we didn't make it back. When Damien and Melissa pulled into the driveway, their car was loaded with supplies, ropes, backpacks, water bottles. Too much gear for a simple hike. Melissa hopped out, cheerful as ever. "You ready, Mom? Today's going to be unforgettable." I swallowed hard. She was right. It would be unforgettable, but not for the reasons she thought. The trail started easy. Birds chirped, sunlight filtered through the trees, and the air smelled of pine. For a moment, I almost convinced myself this was just another family outing. But then I noticed Damien hanging back, watching us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Melissa snapped photos constantly, positioning us at the edge of cliffs, near rocky ledges, always smiling, always saying, "Just one more picture." Henry gripped my hand so tightly my fingers ached. "They're looking for the right spot," he whispered, when Melissa wandered ahead. I nodded, my throat too dry to answer. After 2 hours, we reached a lookout point. The valley stretched below us, breathtaking and vast. The wind was sharp, whipping through my hair, tugging at my jacket. "This is perfect," Melissa said brightly, setting down her backpack. She pulled out her camera, motioning for Henry and me to stand closer to the edge. "Right there! The light is beautiful." Every instinct in my body screamed no, but Damien stepped behind us, his shadow long against the rocks. "Go on," he said, his voice low. "Closer." I'll never forget what happened next. Melissa raised the camera, her smile wide. "Say cheese!" And in that instant, I felt 2 hands slam into my back. The world disappeared, the ground vanished, and Henry and I were falling. The rush of air roared in my ears. The rocks blurred past, jagged and merciless. I grabbed for Henry, my fingers clawing at his sleeve as we tumbled together. His cry tore through the wind, raw and desperate. My chest crushed against stone. My arm snapped under me. Pain exploded like fire. For a heartbeat, I thought it was over. I thought this was how I would die. Broken, discarded, murdered by my own son. But then, as I lay gasping in the dirt, Henry's voice reached me. Weak, trembling, but fierce. "Hilda, don't move. Play dead." So I lay there. I forced myself still, even as blood filled my mouth and my ribs screamed. I let my eyes go blank, my body limp, like a corpse waiting to be buried. A few feet away, I could hear Damien's voice. Calm, calculating. They're dead, both of them. Eyes open, no breathing. And Melissa? Sweet, smiling Melissa, the girl who once called me Mom. Her voice was like venom. "Perfect," she whispered. "Now we can finally move on." My heart shattered, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that this had never been about love or family or even revenge. This was about money, about power. To them, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a human being. I was just an obstacle standing between them and everything Henry and I had built. And as I lay there pretending to be dead, I felt a vow form inside me. If I survived this, I would make them pay. The sun burned above us, my vision blurred, my body throbbed with pain. But I didn't move. I didn't breathe too loud. Henry's hand brushed mine, faint but steady. We were alive, barely, but alive. And for now, that had to be enough. When I opened my eyes again, the sky was blinding. The roar of wind was gone, replaced by shouting, footsteps, radios crackling. Rescuers. Somehow, by a miracle, hikers on another trail had seen us fall. They'd called for help. And within an hour, paramedics were lifting me onto a stretcher, strapping my broken body down as pain ripped through every inch of me. I wanted to scream, to tell them everything, but Henry squeezed my hand again, reminding me of his whispered command, "Play dead." So I closed my mouth. I kept silent, because the nightmare wasn't over. At the hospital, everything blurred. Bright lights, rushing nurses, machines beeping. I drifted in and out of consciousness, but one thing cut through the haze. The sound of voices. Damien and Melissa. They arrived within hours, faces painted with grief. Melissa sobbed loudly in the waiting room, wailing about losing her parents. Damien played the role of the dutiful son, holding her hand, nodding solemnly at the doctors. But when no one was looking, I caught it. A smile, the faintest curl of Damien's lips as he looked at me through the glass. He thought he'd won. I couldn't move much. My ribs were shattered, my arm in a sling, my whole body battered. But my mind was alive, racing, desperate. That's when I met Nurse Innes. She was young, sharp-eyed, with a kindness that reminded me of Richard. She leaned close as she checked my vitals, whispering so softly only I could hear. "I know you're awake," she murmured. "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." I did, weakly, but enough. Her eyes widened, but she didn't gasp or call attention. Instead, she nodded ever so slightly. "Don't worry. I believe you. I'll help you." For the first time since that cliff, I felt a sliver of hope. That evening, Damien came into my room alone. He pulled the chair close, leaning over me. His voice was low, almost tender, but laced with menace. "You should have stayed down there, Mom," he whispered. "Now you're just making things harder. For both of us." My blood froze. I wanted to cry out, to call for help, but I forced myself still, letting my eyelids flutter shut. Pretending. Always pretending. What Damien didn't know was that Henry had prepared for this. Hidden in his hospital gown pocket was the same small voice recorder he'd carried on the hike. Despite the fall, it still worked. And now, it captured every word Damien said. The next morning, Nurse Innes returned. She adjusted the blankets, slipped her hand under mine, and pressed something small into my palm. A note, I told the police. Stay strong. I clutched that scrap of paper like it was the key to salvation. Because it was. Later that day, detectives arrived. They questioned Damien and Melissa in the waiting room, their polite smiles straining under pressure. Melissa cried, insisting it was just a tragic accident. Damien repeated the same lines, calm and rehearsed. But then, the officer pulled out the recorder. He pressed play, and the room filled with Damien's voice. You should have stayed down there, Mom. Now you're just making things harder. For both of us. Melissa's face drained of color. Damien's jaw locked. And for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. That was the moment everything shifted. The detectives looked at each other. The mask Damien had worn for months began to crack. Melissa turned on him, hissing, I told you to keep your mouth shut, while Damien glared at her with pure hatred. They tried to spin excuses. They claimed it was grief-talking, just words taken out of context. But the damage was done. The trap they'd set for us had snapped shut on them instead. As they argued with the police, I lay in that hospital bed, tears streaming silently down my cheeks. Not from pain, not even from relief, but from the sheer weight of betrayal. How had my life come to this? How had I raised a son who wanted me dead? How had I missed every warning sign until it was too late? That night, as the officers led Damien, and Melissa away for questioning, Henry turned his head toward me. His face was pale, his breathing labored, but his eyes shone with fierce determination. We're not done yet, Hilda, he whispered. This isn't justice. Not yet. And I knew he was right, because the recorder had saved us, for now. But the real battle, the one that would decide whether Damien paid for Richard's death, for the theft, for the cliff. That battle was just beginning, and it would be fought in a courtroom. When I opened my eyes again, the sky was blinding. The roar of wind was gone, replaced by shouting, footsteps, radios crackling, rescuers. Somehow, by a miracle, hikers on another trail had seen us fall. They'd called for help, and within an hour, paramedics were lifting me onto a stretcher, strapping my broken body down as pain ripped through every inch of me. I wanted to scream, to tell them everything, but Henry squeezed my hand again, reminding me of his whispered command, play dead, so I closed my mouth. I kept silent, because the nightmare wasn't over. At the hospital, everything blurred, bright lights, rushing nurses, machines beeping. I drifted in and out of consciousness, but one thing cut through the haze, the sound of voices, Damien and Melissa. They arrived within hours, faces painted with grief. Melissa sobbed loudly in the waiting room, wailing about losing her parents. Damien played the role of the dutiful son, holding her hand, nodding solemnly at the doctors, but when no one was looking, I caught it, a smile. The faintest curl of Damien's lips as he looked at me through the glass. He thought he'd won. I couldn't move much. My ribs were shattered, my arm in a sling, my whole body battered. But my mind was alive, racing, desperate. That's when I met Nurse Innes. She was young, sharp-eyed, with a kindness that reminded me of Richard. She leaned close as she checked my vitals, whispering so softly only I could hear. I know you're awake, she murmured. If you can hear me, squeeze my hand. I did. Weakly, but enough. Her eyes widened, but she didn't gasp or call attention. Instead, she nodded ever so slightly. Don't worry. I believe you. I'll help you. For the first time since that cliff, I felt a sliver of hope. That evening, Damien came into my room alone. He pulled the chair close, leaning over me. His voice was low, almost tender, but laced with menace. You should have stayed down there, Mom, he whispered. Now you're just making things harder. For both of us, my blood froze. I wanted to cry out, to call for help, but I forced myself still, letting my eyelids flutter shut, pretending. Always pretending. What Damien didn't know was that Henry had prepared for this. Hidden in his hospital gown pocket was the same small voice recorder. He'd carried on the hike. Despite the fall, it still worked. And now it captured every word Damien said. The next morning, Nurse Innes returned. She adjusted the blankets, slipped her hand under mine, and pressed something small into my palm. A note. I told the police. Stay strong. I clutched that scrap of paper like it was the key to salvation. Because it was. Later that day, detectives arrived. They questioned Damien and Melissa in the waiting room, their polite smiles straining under pressure. Melissa cried, insisting it was just a tragic accident. Damien repeated the same lines, calm and rehearsed, but then the officer pulled out the recorder. He pressed play, and the room filled with Damien's voice. You should have stayed down there, Mom. Now you're just making things harder. For both of us. Melissa's face drained of color. Damien's jaw locked, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. That was the moment everything shifted. The detectives looked at each other. The mask Damien had worn for months began to crack. Melissa turned on him, hissing, I told you to keep your mouth shut, while Damien glared at her with pure hatred. They tried to spin excuses. They claimed it was grief talking, just words taken out of context. But the damage was done. The trap they'd set for us had snapped shut on them instead. As they argued with the police, I lay in that hospital bed, tears streaming silently down my cheeks. Not from pain, not even from relief, but from the sheer weight of betrayal. How had my life come to this? How had I raised a son who wanted me dead? How had I missed every warning sign until it was too late? That night, as the officers led Damien and Melissa away for questioning, Henry turned his head toward me. His face was pale, his breathing labored, but his eyes shone with fierce determination. We're not done yet, Hilda, he whispered. This isn't justice. Not yet. And I knew he was right because the recorder had saved us, for now. But the real battle, the one that would decide whether Damien paid for Richard's death, for the theft, for the cliff, that battle was just beginning, and it would be fought in a courtroom. The hospital was only the beginning. The real reckoning came months later, in a cold courtroom that smelled of old wood and dust, where the truth would finally come to light. The weeks leading up to the trial were a blur. Reporters camped outside our house. Headlines painted Damien and Melissa as monsters. Their smiling engagement photos splashed across every newspaper. My neighbors whispered whenever I walked by, their eyes full of pity. I hated the attention. But I hated the silence more. The silence of the nights when I lay awake, hearing Richard's voice in my dreams, feeling the weight of Damien's betrayal pressing down on me like a stone. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face him, but I knew I had to. The morning of the trial, I walked into the courthouse with Henry at my side, leaning on his arm for strength. My heart pounded as we passed through the heavy double doors, and then I saw him, Damien, my son, my baby. But he wasn't my baby anymore. He sat at the defense table in a crisp suit, his face hardened, his eyes filled with hatred. Melissa sat beside him, her hair pulled back tight, her smile gone. For one fleeting second, I remembered the little boy who used to bring me drawings of superheroes, who used to beg me for one more bedtime story. But that boy was gone. In his place sat a man who had tried to murder me. The prosecution laid everything bare. Richard's notes. The stolen money, the will, the recordings Henry had kept, and finally, the damning words Damien spoke at the hospital. You should have stayed down there. Mom! Each piece of evidence was like another knife in my heart. When it was my turn to testify, I could barely keep my voice steady. I told the jury about the hike, the shove, the fall, the way Henry whispered for me to play dead. I told them about the betrayal, about the pain of realizing my son wanted me gone, and through it all, Damien stared at me. No shame, no remorse, just cold defiance. When Melissa took the stand, she cracked. She wept, throwing blame at Damien, claiming she never wanted things to go so far. It was his idea, she cried. I just went along with it. But her words didn't matter. The jury saw through her. They saw the greed, the manipulation, the lies, and when the verdict came, The air in the courtroom felt heavy with finality. Guilty. On all counts. Damien's jaw tightened. Melissa sobbed. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, life in prison. No parole. I thought I would feel relief. I thought justice would taste sweet. But instead, I sat there, my hands trembling, tears running down my face, feeling nothing but emptiness. Because yes, justice was served. But nothing could bring Richard back, and nothing could give me back the son I had lost to greed and darkness. In the weeks after the trial, Henry and I tried to rebuild our lives. It wasn't easy. Our bodies healed slowly, our spirits even slower. But we held on to each other, just like we always had. One bright spot came unexpectedly. Damien and Melissa's children, our grandchildren, were placed in our care. They were innocent, untouched by their parents' sins. When they ran through the same yard where Richard and Damien once played, their laughter filled the air again. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Now when I sit on the porch Henry built, watching the sun set over the street we've called home for 40 years, I think about everything we've lost, and everything we still have. I think about Richard, my beautiful boy, my light, and how proud he would be of us for surviving. I think about Damien, sitting in a cell, trapped not by walls, but by the darkness in his own soul. And I think about Henry, my rock, the man who saved me with 3 simple words: play dead. To anyone listening to my story, I want you to remember this. Family can be your greatest blessing. But sometimes, it can also be your greatest danger, and when the people you trust most show you who they really are, believe them, because I didn't. And it nearly cost me my life.